Hello, everybody. Welcome to Canadian music in the 80s and 90s and more. If you like what you're seeing, please click the like button and subscribe if you will. I've got a very special guest today. Anyone who lives in Prince Edward Island, actually doesn't, is probably quite familiar with the Saturday Night Hoedown, because I'm hearing it's listened to all over Canada and the world, for that matter. And I've got the host, Darren MacPherson, here. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Alan. It's glad to be on board. And yeah, you know what? In this digital age, the opportunity for people to listen anywhere in the world is really at our advantage. It's gotten to the point, I've had listeners in China. I've had listeners, somebody who was getting ready to climb Everest and happened to be listening to the show. So it's kind of neat that way.
Yeah, that is kind of cool to realize you're reaching that far, I would guess. When did you start doing the Hoedown?
I started in 2016, I suppose. I'm coming up on 9 years. So does that math work out? Yes. Yeah, 2016. So the very start of 2016, I had the opportunity to take over the hosting job here. And
the show itself has been since...
1958 is when the Hoedown started. And it's drastically different than it was back then. Originally, it was really just kind of a country music show on a radio station that did a bunch of different themed shows.
Right.
Eventually it became all request. And then, of course, through the power of the internet, it became what it is now.
And now it's kind of just really concentrating on the classics that really don't get played anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of have a few unwritten rules, I guess you could say, Alan, of we definitely stick to the classics. I kind of have a soft edge of like 2000s and earlier, but that is a soft edge. And then beyond that, it's, anything that people want in that era.
Because I've heard a wide variety of years and I guess eras of country music played on the show. I guess the one thing that I want to bring up, because I could do mostly Canadian stuff, but I do the more part. You really do touch on a lot of local and maritime artists as well on the show. Like I hear a lot of Rankins, I hear local PEI artists.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the best parts about it being all request is that people have the opportunity to request songs from artists that maybe they saw in a recent Kaylee or whatever the case may be, or maybe the Rankins were just at Harbourfront in Summerside or something like that, and so they want to hear a Rankins tune. Well, if it's in our system, they get it for sure.
No, it's great to hear that because I just don't hear a lot of stations playing their local, like really local artists anymore. Like, I mean, you hear a lot of, it seems to be so, I mean, radio has changed a lot. How long have you been in radio?
Since 1992.
1992. And was it something you went to school for?
Yes, I did. I went to school in Ontario. I actually started here at this radio station just doing some part-time stuff. And I really wanted to get into it on a more full-time basis. So I went and talked to my boss at the time and I said, well, how do I make that happen? And he said, the easiest way, to be honest with you, is to go to school. So I went to school up in Ontario, got a job at a station up there, coincidentally enough, which worked out for me quite well at the time. I met my wife. We had a child, one child at that point. We have two now, and wanted to get back to the simpler way of life. So we ended up back here, and before long, I'm back in radio here in Charlottetown. So life is full of circles that way, I suppose.
Excellent. So what kind of changes would you say the most you've seen in the year? Like, I mean, it's changed a lot, the radio industry, period. Like the way it's run, the ownerships have changed a lot. Like it seems like a lot of them are owned by the same companies now.
Yeah, I mean, well, we can start out with the technology. When I started, the most recent technology you'd have was CDs, but you were still playing off of LPs, records.
Yeah.
And we had what was called carts, and they looked a lot like 8-tracks, if people know what 8-tracks are. And you would simply slot those into a machine, and they would just have a song on them. So that was the technology of the time. Eventually, we started moving everything onto hard drives, all the music, and that's kind of where we are now. But even more so, we don't have any of our music on site anymore. We are we're maritime owned by Maritime Broadcasting, and all the computer systems are set up in Halifax, and we operate out of there. So I wanted to touch on really quickly about the ownership side of things, which you're absolutely right. If you think about, especially in a lot of the bigger markets, you've got your Rogers, your Bell, those organizations that have owned radio stations for a few years now. I kind of think, if I'm going to say something controversial, they kind of thought of it as a a money-making opportunity, which business wouldn't think of things that way. But radio's always, in my mind anyway, been meant to be more of a community-based service.
Right.
Sure, you have to make money. I'm not going to argue that.
Right.
But you can't really, I don't think, build that kind of money-making machine that a lot of those organizations have wanted to build over the time. And I think a lot of them are finding that out now. And if radio is going to continue to succeed into the 21st century here, it's going to have to succeed based on being there for the community. And I think that's what smaller ownership like Maritime Broadcasting does, and a lot of other organizations throughout Canada kind of have that figured out and understand that that's a big part of it. But for a lot of those big conglomerates, not reaching their share prices is the most important thing. And It doesn't really line up with community-based values necessarily.
Because it doesn't seem to be the way it used to be. Like you said, everything's coming off of a computer system now, you don't actually put a record on or CD in the machine anymore. And it doesn't seem like, you're one of the few shows that actually takes a request and play them. I don't know if many stations can actually do that, because they have a certain amount of songs programmed in their system, and if it's not in there, they can't play it.
Right.
But yours is one of the few shows that when they call in and say, I want to hear the Rankins or All the Way to Cardigan, you can do that.
Well, it's absolutely the case. Now, I will let you behind the curtain a little bit, Wizard of Oz style. If it's not in our system, we can't do it either, but we've made a dedicated effort to put as much of that old stuff into the system as possible. Like, one of the most heartbreaking things for me is when somebody requests something and we don't happen to have it.
Right.
And then they say, well, I'll link you to the YouTube video of it. And it's like, well, the last thing you want is for that to be broken up by some Tide ad or something. It's not, sure. I can't rely on YouTube for those types of things as much as I'd love to. But beyond that, those moments are few and far between. We have the privilege, truthfully, of being able to play most of the stuff that people request, which is certainly a good feeling.
Because it seems to me like the technology is almost your enemy too, because music is so easy to access now. Like, back in 1992, if you wanted a copy of your song, you had to go out to a music store and buy it.
Yeah.
Or hear it on the radio or see a video on Much Music or CMT or wherever. And now it's just, you can just go to YouTube and find it.
You're absolutely right. And that's the challenge. But one of the great things about a show like the Saturday Night Hoedown is it's that song. It's a Conway Twitty tune or a Stompin' Tom Connor song. But it's also, this is going out to Gene in Hunter River or whatever the case may be. And so people get to enjoy that aspect of things, especially even though we are broadcast around the world and people could listen all over the place, and they do. It's still that hometown feel, and people appreciate that. And even if they don't know Jean from Hunter River, they can get the concept of Jean and her family are having a great time celebrating her birthday.
Yeah, I hear that too. I'm up at my camper up west, and we have it playing in the background, and it's like a Saturday night tradition. The campfire's going, the hot dogs are going around, and the hoedown's on. And it seems to be everyone that calls in a request and you send one out to is probably doing something similar. You're out in the garage or out on a boat or at the cottage, whatever. And
it's those moments, Alan, that I'm driving home about that concept of community, because it's so easy to conceive of that person doing the exact same thing as you, having that exact same tradition, because you're doing it too. You're doing the exact same thing that you have to assume the other people are doing because they're enjoying it just like you are. And in terms of the show, you've got a pretty rare thing here, that this show is very big. In terms of you don't hear a lot of shows like this on other radio stations. I have friends in the business, obviously, because I've been in the business, who don't really understand. That can't really understand the model. And now, make no mistake, I don't take any credit for this. When I say it's been on since 1958, that's what gets people thinking the tradition. It has nothing to do with me. But I love being the herald of the Saturday Night Hoedown, to be able to, blow its horn for it. But my point is this: because it's been in our community and in our tradition here on Prince Edward Island for so long, people have a hard time in other markets really understanding how it could possibly be so vital for people and so important, because in those other places, maybe people aren't as easily tied to a tradition that's wrapped up in radio broadcasting.
I personally believe it's because it's something rare. It's something that you don't hear on a lot of radio. It's something that doesn't exist in radio anymore like it used to, and maybe that's why people listen to it, because it's refreshing and it's not the same 10 songs played every hour like most stations are, because it seems to be you'll hear the same song every day on some radio stations, but the Hoedown is something different. You know, you pull stuff out that people haven't heard in a long time, and it doesn't seem to matter what era or year it came from. If you guys can get it in your system, it'll get played. And I think that's what makes the show what it is.
One of my favorite things, and something that keeps me engaged here 9 years later, is when that rare request comes in that it's like, oh, wow, I don't know that I've had that in 2, 3, 4 years. And it makes me excited, because that means that people are saying to themselves, if they happen to hear it in a store or in an ad or something, they go, oh, I got to request that at the Hoedown next week. That's special to me. That means something. So you're absolutely right, Alan. There's that aspect of, you know, people being able to hold and experience something that is rare.
So let's get into personal music choices. What are your favorites? Like, what is your, like, I'm assuming you're into a lot of different kinds of music and country. What are your favorites?
So this is why your passion is really kind of important to me too, is before I ever got into country radio, I was always extremely passionate about Canadian music in my era, which was the 80s and 90s. So, I mean, I used to brag to my friends about my CanCon, my Canadian content in my CDs was about 60%, which seems bizarre to most people, but I just loved listening to Canadian music. So, I mean, it was that era, right? So I had Moist, I had Alanis Morissette, I had all these Canadian artists, Treble Charger, Sloan, these acts that were huge at the time.
5440.
5440,
like
exactly, those kind of guys. They were acts that were really talking to me and my generation at the time, and I was really passionate about that. It's not to say that I didn't love country music as well, because I did. I grew up on it, and it was kind of around as well. But, I mean, I don't have to tell you, at that time, that music was really unique and special to a lot of people, and it drove home a lot of, you know, personal moments and memories and so on. But, I mean, Canadian country music was doing it at the time too. We had Paul Brandt, we had Terry Clark. Of course, Shania becomes one of the biggest names in country music as a whole.
And Stompin' Tom came back.
And Stompin' Tom came back, right. And so those moments are special too. So yeah, I mean, all those artists certainly have been important to me over time. And you know, call me biased if you want, but it still kind of feels like one of the greatest generations of music. So the fact that it remains is really special too. Like, I'm not disparaging what's going out there now, but it seems like there has been so much of what I'll call disposable music, where it's here for a day, it's gone the next, that the concept of, you know, a genre or, you know, this is 80s music or this is 90s music, it doesn't feel like that could even exist anymore, because everybody kind of followed a sound in that era. And now it's just like, well, you know, there's 50 new songs today. Well, 50 new songs, well, how do we define what that sounds like?
I personally have always found Canadians to have a little bit more of a different thing. I mean, I've always felt Canadians had more of a distinct sound than Americans. Like, it's almost like British. Like, I've always felt like there's a lot of Canadian artists. When Gord Downie opens his mouth and sings, you know that's the Tragically Hip.
Right.
You know what Gordon Lightfoot is the second he opens his mouth. You know who Stompin' Tom, Anne Murray. You know who they are the second. They don't blend in with everybody else, but they make great music. They made great music in their day. The only thing, the thing I like to promote, I don't know if you're up for this, is I like to take these vintage artists. They're still making music today. And some of it is actually really good, if not better than what they used to do, but it just doesn't get a chance on
Right.
today's radio,
Yeah.
which I find absolutely shameful because, for example, Honeymoon Suite has a new album out,
Right.
and it's incredible.
Sure.
It's really good.
And
The
nobody will
song-
probably give it the time of day.
Well, that's the thing. Radio won't play it.
Yeah.
And I find that kind of sad. You know,
Yeah.
like I find it kind of sad that Stompin' Tom could put out a new CD, which he has, you know, posthumously.
Yeah.
And nobody plays it.
Right.
And I don't understand that aspect. But I guess, like you said, it is a commerce thing with radio these days, and it's not the same as it used to be. It's
Be nice if we could go back, to be honest with you, Alan, because I think there's a place for it still. I mean, the Hoedown is a prime example of how it could be if it was possible for those companies to just look past that bottom line. I know maybe that's pie in the sky, but I still kind of feel that way.
I just find it. I remember how exciting it used to be back in the late 80s and early 90s when your favorite band put a new album out.
Yeah, man, for sure.
You wanted to hear the new stuff.
Yeah.
And it just seems nobody wants to nowadays. It's like radio has purposely said, no, you guys are retro.
Yeah, right.
This is new stuff.
Yeah.
And you guys, your new stuff doesn't belong here either.
Yeah.
And it just seems kind of shameful that.
You know, I find myself guilty of it at times too because of the ease of the technology. I mean, you describe something that's very reminiscent to me is going down to the music store, buying a new CD, and your afternoon is spent listening to that new CD from track 1 to track 12 or 13 or whatever the case
And
may
reading
be.
the liner notes.
And reading the liner notes.
Yeah.
And when you're done track 13, you're probably going to go give it another re-listen because there was a couple of tracks that really caught your ear. And I find myself guilty of it as well, where in this streaming era, it's like, oh, so-and-so has a new song out? Okay, I'll go check that out. But will I actually listen to the whole album? Not like I used to. It's just because it's on my phone, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, well-
guilty as charged on that.
Definitely has changed a lot. So how long do you plan on keeping doing this? Because you seem to really, I can hear the joy in your voice when you host this show every Saturday night, and it's something that can't be faked. It's not something that can be pretended. It's you really seem to enjoy the fact that you get to do this show.
I
every
do.
Saturday.
I do enjoy it greatly. I'll tell you, and I don't know that I've ever shared this with anybody outside of my wife. When I decided to come back into radio just to host the Hoedown, I said to her at the time, you know what? I think I'll do 8 years. I'll do 8 years, and that'll feel good because that's a good long time, and it will feel something like my mentor, J.P. Goody. He did 30 years, so I would never even dream. Well, I say that now, but who knows? At the time, I said 8 years, but I got to that 8-year mark, and I was still having so much fun that the concept of, I'm going to say this selfishly, taking my Saturday nights back.
Yeah.
That concept of doing that felt like I was actually doing myself a disservice because this is where I wanted to be. So why would I ever stop doing it if I was having so much fun? So I wish I had an answer, but there's a part of me that is kind of happy not to have one because,
Right.
Maybe it's okay just to say, I'm going to keep doing it until it's not fun anymore because I don't see that happening anytime soon.
Well, I've always heard you'll never work a day in your life if you enjoy what you do.
Right?
Right.
If only I could make a mint doing this, which unfortunately I can't. But if I could, then that would be it. This would be the ride.
Awesome. I can't thank you enough for joining me for this interview. It's great to hear the perspective of someone who works in this line of work in the industry, because you really have seen a lot come and go in the past few years, and that's what I like to talk about.
Oh, you know what? It's been a lot of fun. This ride has been a lot of fun. It's been a lot of fun chatting with you here today, and stay tuned. More to come, I'm sure.
Thanks very much, Darren. Take care of yourself.
Thanks, Alan.